hold on to your butts, because this week we're going to do a tutorial on our Jurassic Park Adventure Strategy Game project. So sit back and enjoy, because I'm Pete, and this is Board Game Refab. Thanks for joining us this week. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and follow us on social media to get all of our updates. If you're returning to the channel, welcome back, and thank you so much for the support. Last time, we saw a timeline of the entire Jurassic Park project. This go around, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the project and give you a tutorial on how we created the landforms for both the tiles and the border.
You will see here that I'm using the original board as a template to get the size and basic shape correct. I will use it again a few more times to get the basic shape laid out. Getting the middle chunk of foam out is a tricky and messy endeavor. As long as you do not stray too far from the guide cuts we made initially, then you can use whatever method works well for you. I chose to use the hacksaw because precision wasn't needed and it made quick work of it. I hot glued the game board onto the foam to keep it from moving around while I made these cuts. The main thing to keep in mind with all the following cuts is to make sure there's a slight bevel when cutting any of the edges that will match up to one another. When cutting the center out of the border, think the hole along the game board needs to be smaller than the hole on the underside. When cutting the tiles, it needs to be reversed, and the hex on the top of the tile needs to be bigger than the hex underneath. This will ensure that they match up neatly when it's all said and done. These next few steps took a lot of eyeballing and just taking little bites over and over until it started to look right. The only part that needs to have clean lines is where we're going to place the cliffs. I use the X-Acto knife to make those cuts as clean as possible, but for the rest, I cut the rough shape and then use the wire brush to blend it in. Just keep in mind that you can always carve, scrape, and cut more off of the block, but adding any significant amount of material back becomes really difficult. When we add plaster a little bit later, we will hide a lot of mistakes, so don't get too hung up on the details. All I was really looking for was the basic shape to build upon with the plaster. The hills for the border are really just there to break up the large flat sections. I really just wanted to create some visual interest here, so it's really just freestyled until it looked right. As you'll see when we get to the tiles, they're very scripted to match the game tiles. It's important that cliffs and fences are placed in the same spots as in the original game. So this is why I marked each tile to match up the in-game tile, and then I just kind of worked from there to make sure it worked out. Ignore the plaster on the tiles at this point. We'll get to that in a bit. These are just some model railroad rocks that I had on hand, but just about any rocks or pebbles with some texture will work. I use latex adhesive to attach them since it is pretty long working time and takes paint well. You glue them on like a puzzle and you should be good to go. The large rocks give a good look, but wind up looking a lot like a stone wall rather than a cliff. To fix this, I added in some smaller rocks in random spots to blend the gaps and break up the pattern a bit. If you look closely, I had a little helper with me on the tile cliffs. Thanks for the help, Lucy. I decided to Mod Podge over the rocks after the glue set up because I wanted to make sure that they solidly attached to the foam. The Mod Podge will also help prevent the rocks from soaking up too much paint. If you do this step, just make sure to overbrush them. And by that I mean you'll let it set up a bit after you brush it on and then go through and take a relatively dry brush and go once more over it. This will help prevent the Mod Podge from covering all of the detail that we just worked so hard to achieve by adding the rocks. Cutting the border up and gluing it back together turned out to be quite a learning experience. The splitting up was pretty straightforward. Just be sure to keep the cuts within a plain section of the landscape to help them blend in later. Adding the magnets, on the other hand, turned out to be a little bit tricky. I marked the top in two places, and then I did the same on the bottom. You open it up, connect the top and the bottom marks with a line, then measure up from the bottom to find identical spacing on both pieces. The actual measurements here are pretty arbitrary as long as they're consistent. If the measurements on the top and the bottom are the same, then you should find them right in the exact same spot on both pieces. Now once the spots are marked simply cut a pilot hole with an X-Acto blade and then use a drill bit slightly larger than your magnets to make the hole. Just be sure to drill the hole deep enough to recess the magnets just below the surface. You can see here that I check it quite a few times. I used hot glue to fix the magnets. Just be sure to double check the polarity before you glue them in place. I decided to use 3 magnets on each hole to ensure that once the plaster was applied later, the pull from the magnets would be strong enough to penetrate through that plaster and through that little gap we made. The plaster I used to blend all the previous work together was Durham's Rock Hard Water Putty. I chose it because it was reasonably priced, cleaned up with water, it doesn't shrink, and dries rock hard like the name suggests. Just spread it out as evenly as possible, being sure to cover all of the foam. This is what we get most of the durability from, but if you spread it too thin towards the edges, it can become a little fragile. You'll just have to play with it to get the feel for how much is enough to protect the edges without causing issues when matching them up together. This only took a few hours to dry rock hard, and it slowly lightened up as it dried in color. So it was super simple to know when we could move on to the last stage of the terraforming. You will notice that I did not sand the plaster on the tiles. I was afraid of doing more harm than good when I got to those, and as it turns out, this is probably an unnecessary step altogether, unless there's some really high peaks on the plaster after it dries. I also had to clean up a few of the edges, but this often resulted in chipping off more than I intended, which then made me have to go back and repaint them, and replaster them, and repaint them, and replaster them. So this entire step can be prevented as long as you're just careful with the application of the plaster in the first place. Just make sure it's smooth, and make sure you clean up all the edges with a wet finger. Then you should be good to go.
Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed what we had for you today. If you did like it, or you're building a project of your own that you're going to use some of these techniques on, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. Next time, we're going to do a tutorial on how we painted the landforms and some of the other details for the project. So don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media to get all of our updates when we add new videos. That's all I've got for now, so we'll see you next time, because I'm Pete, and this is Board Game Revenge.